So I talked a little bit about the Omicron variant of the coronavirus last week on the show. And there have been some discussions in the media about what should we do about this, right? Biden, for his part, announced that there will not be lockdowns, which is interesting because objectively speaking, the lockdowns worked. If you look at other countries, who had lockdowns and who were actually enforcing these lockdowns very well. New Zealand and Australia actually come to mind as shining examples of this. The case numbers dropped precipitously. So it's interesting to see the American president get up on, get to the podium and say, well, there aren't going to be any lockdowns. So an interesting question arises, though, which is, should there be lockdowns? And regardless of how you feel about lockdowns, I kind of want to break down the kind of lockdown argument as I see it for a second. So, the thing that makes lockdowns perilous is that there is this understanding that we're not supposed to go out and do things. And a lot of human interaction and a lot of human economy has to do with leaving one's home and going out and doing stuff, right? There's plenty of stuff we can do from home, but at some point, right, we want to see our friends, we want to see our family, we want to travel, we want to do things, right? It's a core part of the human experience. And actually, it is well understood science that the interacting with other human beings keeps us sane. It helps our mental health and essentially just keeps us going because we're social creatures, right? We want to spend time with other people. So, that is an obvious facet of the lockdown. But another facet of the lockdown is once you say that there's a lockdown, you essentially say to businesses that rely on people coming into their stores for business, hey, tough nuggets, you got to go, right? And we saw during the initial lockdowns in the United States that lots of small businesses closed. And a lot of these are mom and pop places. Oftentimes people, know the owners or you're a regular there. Or, there was a lot of, hey, my local X closed, right? And it's really unfortunate because obviously we don't want businesses to close if we can avoid it, especially smaller businesses, because you'll hear politicians say all the time, oh, small business is the lifeblood of the economy. And in some ways, that's true. I don't want to get into a debate about that now. But what I'll say is, so a lockdown essentially causes us to go against our natural human behaviors. And a lockdown is often precipitated, the ordering of a lockdown often precipitates the mass closure of many small businesses who cannot afford to shut their doors for so long, before they have to let staff go. And also jobs get cut. And there's a whole bunch of things that happen from lockdowns from an economic point of view. But on the other hand, they do work, right? They save lives. Objectively speaking, they do lower the rates at which coronavirus is spread because people are not going about their usual social business. And because they're not doing that, they're not in contact with other people. And if you're not in contact with other people, you can't spread the virus. So the question is, what's the right thing to do? And it's interesting because a lot of the debate about lockdowns has to do with those key factors that I outlined. But as we found in other countries, France is an astute example, is that you can actually lock down and you can support the economy. Now, you're still going to get that hit to mental health, right? But the idea is if you do a full enforced lockdown, you only have to be locked down for small portions at a time. New Zealand and Australia, again, shining examples, that they only lock down for a couple weeks at a time and they're able to reduce the strain that it takes on the economy because people actually do it, right? There's buy-in from the populace, but also the reason there's buy-in from the populace is because the government takes care of the people. In France, the example I had brought up earlier, wages were paid out at about 80%. You could get 80% of your salary or average working wages paid to you by the government, no strings attached, so that you would stay home. And what this did is it took the burden off of employers to pay for wages for employees that weren't working. It allowed people to stay at home and not starve. So there were solutions that you could actually tell people to go home, stay at home, and quarantine, but also not create significant damage to the economy. So on balance, I actually think the correct answer is there should be lockdowns. once we have a better sense of Omicron and how it works and how it functions, and it does seem to be at this point more transmissible and less deadly. So perhaps this is the variant that becomes endemic in the population. It's hard to say, and I'm not a scientist, okay? Caveats as always. But if we are requiring a lockdown, or if lockdowns look like they can be productive, I'm full steam ahead, team lockdown. And the reason for this is because, truthfully speaking, as long as the government can be coerced to provide for the common person, a lockdown actually doesn't have to be that bad. We can lock down for 4 to 6 weeks or longer if we have to, as long as the government continues to pay people to stay at home. If people aren't paid to stay at home, what happens is you lose the incentive to stay at home. People are incentivized to go and find work because they're starving, they're running out of money. 60% of individuals in the United States cannot afford a $400 expense. This is obviously very alarming if you're asking people to live without wages or salary for months at a time, right? So we can lock down, and if the science says that a lockdown is appropriate, I think we should lock down. But we can only lock down provided that the government actually takes the time to expend the monies necessary, and not loans, none of this other bullshit. Maybe conditional payments, sure, fine, like the PPP was supposed to be, the Paycheck Protection Plan. This was supposed to be money given to businesses so that they would not lay off workers, and they would continue to pay workers as if they were coming in, even though they weren't. Okay. By the way, the coronavirus lockdowns also just tend to exacerbate some of the other existential economic problems that we have in the United States, such as the fact that people have to work multiple jobs to live. But again, don't really want to deal with that right now. I just want to talk about the broader point of, if we do have to lock down, we should go ahead with the lockdown, and we should give sufficient incentives for people to stay home. Small businesses, they should get comped for the amount of money it would cost them to pay their bills. People don't stop collecting rent just because there's a lockdown, right? Unless there are rules or money given. So the government then has to enact rules or give money. Same thing with with workers, right? They need to collect a wage. So you either have to provide money to the people who owe money to someone else, or you have to take government action to restrict the collection of payments that are simply made from one person to another, right? And by this, I mean rent and utilities and other things, right? So if there are services that you use on the regular, and the sole purpose of you getting your paycheck is to go and pay them, or like a mortgage and things like that, then the government can actually legislate and say, hey, the economy is going to freeze. We're going to create the financial backstop. No one's going to owe anybody any money for the duration of whatever. And we're all just going to stay at home. And by the way, that would be not necessarily a bad thing. It would be very functional, and you could do it. Or if you don't like that approach, you can say, all right, well, you are going to still owe the money to people who you typically owe money to, but in that same vein, the government is going to pay you, whether it's a flat fee or it's a percentage of your salary or however you'd want to do it. The point I'm trying to make here is that there are a plethora of options in order for us to, successfully craft a plan that allows a lockdown to not be dangerous. So that the question doesn't become, should there be a lockdown? The question becomes, how short can we make the lockdown that we're going to have? Because ideally, the lockdown is short, everyone abides by it, and then we reduce cases down enough to a point where the lockdown can be lifted. And of course, we have our thresholds, and the government creates those, and we just go forward and do it. There are ways to make this a safer public policy for everyone involved. And if we are going to do lockdowns, which we may have to do, and I'm in favor of, you cannot do them without support. That's the bottom line.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye for now.